Hi, this is Ali Arango of Little Guy CGI, and today I would like to show you how to animate 2D art in Blender 2.79. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, go to Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Also, while you're in here, click on Add-ons, put a check mark next to 3D View: 3D Navigation, then scroll down. Put a check mark next to Pie Menu: 3D Viewport Pie Menus, as well as Pie Menu: UI Pie Menu Official. Blender is a spectacular 3D program. You can do all kinds of amazing things in 3D in Blender. What I think that sometimes what people wouldn't think of is the very cool things that you can do with 2D images inside of Blender. So that's what I want to show you today. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have this cube selected. We can tell the cube is selected because it's highlighted orange. We're going to press X to bring up our delete menu. We're then going to delete this cube. We're now going to go to display. We're going to click front. And then when we click front, see right here where it says front perspective, we want to be in what's called front orthographic view. Orthographic view is kind of like a way of showing 3D objects as if they were 2D. So see where it says view perspective / ortho here, we're just going to left click there. Then right here you can see this says front ortho, so front orthographic. When you look right here, you can see there's this little symbol here. This is a 3D cursor in Blender. In Blender, where there's 3D cursors at is where objects tend to come into Blender at. What we want to do is bring in our first image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Shift. While holding Shift, I'm going to press A. This brings up our Add To menu. There is something we want to do, use images as planes. That's something I forgot. So let's go to File, User Preferences, go to Add-ons, and then what we want to do is make sure that there is a check mark next to Import Images as Planes. There we go. See right here, Import dash Export : Import Images as Planes. Make sure you have a check mark right here. So with that check mark being there in add-ons, I'm going to hold Shift A again. This brings up our Add To menu. We're going to go to Mesh, and then we're going to go down to Images as Planes. We're going to left click here, and now what we're going to do is look for where we have our images at. So the first image we're going to work on putting some or adding some animation to is this image right here. So with this image clicked on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to this menu here and see where it says diffuse. We want this image to not have to have lighting on it from the outside. We want this image to be fully lit. So what we're going to do is left click where we see shade list right here, and then we're going to select Import Images as Planes. So then we see this right here, which is the image in Blender brought right to that 3D cursor. Okay, with this image inside of Blender and selected, what we want to do is press R to rotate on the Z axis 90, and then press Enter to lock that in. I'm going to press S and then move my mouse to the side to scale. I'm going to press S to scale this even bigger. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look to right here. We're going to click here and we're going to switch from solid view. Oops, we're going to click from solid view and move to material view. So now we can see our image here. Now, one of the things I want to say now is I like to set things up with front orthographic view. To see this effect that we're about to put on this happen, we need to make sure we're actually not in front orthographic view. So what I'm going to do is hold the middle mouse button, just rotate very slightly, just so that we're outside of front orthographic view. Okay, so with the view like this now and with our image selected, when you look here, you see this is object mode. When you come into Blender, you come into Blender in object mode. Typically, when you come into default the default setup of Blender like we had it before we brought this image in. So what what we want to do is click right here, and then we want to click here to go to edit mode. So the way things work in Blender is in object mode, you move whole objects around. In edit mode, you can manipulate objects by vertices, edges, or faces by selecting one of these three buttons here. Even though this is a 2D image brought into Blender, this was brought into Blender as a plane. So it's a 2D image brought in as a plane. So it's still technically a 3D object. So what we want to do is with this object selected, we want to press the W key to bring up our specials menu, and then we want to select subdivide. Once we click subdivide and we look over here, see we see subdivide here, we see this number of cuts. We want to take this number of cuts up to 10. Okay, so that gives us all of these different subdivisions here. So now I'm going to click here, go to object mode. I'm going to click here and then click here to go back to edit mode. And I did that just so that menu that was over here, the subdivide menu, would, for lack of a better word, lock in and disappear. What I'm going to do is press W again to bring up our specials menu again. I'm going to that same subdivide. I'm going to left click, and then we can see again, here's the subdivide menu, the number of cuts. We're going to take this up to 10, just like before. Okay, the reason why we subdivided this image is what we want to do is we want to animate the cape that's on this character. I'm going to press A to deselect all of the vertices. So we want to animate the cape, but not animate the arms, the chest, the legs, the head of this character. And basically what we want to do is make it look like the cape has a slight flowing animation to it. A lot of times if you want to use 2D art in some kind of presentation, it doesn't take that much animation to have a nice effect. When I say animation, it doesn't take that much movement. So I found this out. I wanted to show you guys. I thought this was really cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to face select by clicking here. I'm going to hold control, and then while holding control, I'm going to right click and hold my I'm gonna hold down the right mouse button, not right click. I'm gonna hold down the right mouse button. So what I'm doing is I have a lasso select from doing this, and I'm taking this lasso and I'm basically outlining all of the faces that make up just this one part of the cape that is above the shoulder. So then I let go, and now we can see that selection. I'm going to hold control and then hold the right mouse button again and grab some more faces there. Now I'm letting go. I'm moving my mouse. I'm holding control. I'm holding the right mouse button again, and I'm dragging to select this area of cape underneath his arm. I'm letting go of control as well as the right mouse button. I'm now holding control and then holding the right mouse button again to grab this part of the cape right here. Letting go of control as well as the right mouse button. Moving my mouse. Now I'm holding control, holding the right mouse button. And I am just selecting this part of the cape here. So I'm going to grab this little area here and here. So I'm going to hold control and the right mouse button, let go. Hold control and the right mouse button, let go. Hold control, mouse button, let go. Hold control and the right mouse button and let go. This here, hold control and the right mouse button, let go. Doesn't have to be exact. Okay. Okay, so with all these faces selected, what we want to do now is look to this menu right here. See this button right here, our vertex data button, or our data button? We're going to look to where we see vertex groups right here. If you come in here and you see this say vertex groups, just click the black arrow and you'll see this here. So with these faces selected, what we want to do is click plus. Now when we click this plus button, basically what Blender did was it made a group for us to assign these faces to. So what we're going to do is by hitting the plus button, we made a group, but we didn't assign the faces to the group yet. We have to actually look to here where we see assign. So we're assigning a weight of 100. Think of weight as being how you influence something. So we're just going to click assign. And now we're going to double click here. We're going to name this cape and then press enter to lock that in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to click here to go to object mode. Now we're going to click on what looks like this wrench. This is our modifier panel. We're going to click here, and then we're going to look for the displace modifier. We're going to left click on the displace modifier, and we see these options for the displace modifier. And what we're going to do is we're going to look to where we see texture. We're going to click new. And after doing that, we're immediately going to look up to this menu here. We're going to look to what looks like this checker box here. We're going to left click here. This is our texture panel. We're going to use this to help us animate our cape. And what we're going to do is look to where this says image or movie. We're going to left click here. Then we're going to select clouds. Now it's interesting, when we did this, Blender is using the displace modifier as well as the clouds to change the shape of this image. So right here, for the most part, the image looks the same. Now if I hold them in the mouse button and turn to the side, now you can see just how much displacement is taking place. However, when we're, for the most part, looking straight at the image, it doesn't look like the image is distorted that much. It's also interesting that if we click front orthographic, it doesn't look like front orthographic. It doesn't look like anything's happening at all. That's why I had mentioned to you about the the front orthographic. You wanting to be turned slightly to the side so you can see that your image is being affected. Okay, so with this done, now what we want to do is click on our modifier panel. We want to look to where we see texture coordinates. And we want to keep this in mind. Let's bring in what we're going to use to control this animation. Our 3D cursors here in Blender, where the 3D cursors at is where objects tend to come into Blender at. We're going to hold Shift, press A. We're going to go to empty, and then we're going to select circle. So here is where our empty came in. And empty is a non-renderable object. They tend to be very useful in multiple programs. So we're going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. We're going to press S to scale. I'm going to press S to scale to make this bigger. And then with that done, we're going to click back on our image. Okay, what we're going to do now is look to this texture coordinates. So see where it says local? This is what I was showing you before we brought in the empty. We're going to click here, and then we're going to select object. So now what we want to do with this object, we could take this eyedropper and then click it and click the empty, because what the eyedropper does is it's a way to put, when you have something pop up like this box here, the eyedropper allows you to easily select what you want to be your object. I'm going to click here, and then I'm just going to select empty. And then basically what's going on now is this object here, which is our empty, when we move this, this will affect our displace modifier. However, we don't want the arms, the chest, the legs. We want this cape to be affected. So what we're going to do is we're going to click vertex group, and then we're going to left click on cape. So now you can see that our character looks, like they're supposed to look. It looks like they're not affected. But now when we click on this empty, you see that? Which I think is very cool. Where it looks like the cape is flowing as far as the animation, but our character for the most part is, not being affected. Now with this, and when I mean this, I mean our displace modifier, we can affect how this works by mainly dealing with the strength here. We can take this strength down. So I'm going to take this down to 500. Yeah, so if you want your effect to be less, you can take the strength of your displace modifier down. Or if you want it to be more, you can take it up. Okay, so as far as actually animating this, like us being able to export this out if we wanted to. Okay, what I'm going to do now is with this empty select is I'm going to move this over here like this. We're going to look up and we can see we're in the default workspace. That's what you see here. This is what you see when you come into Blender. We want to make things a little bit easier for ourselves as we go to animate this. So we're going to click here and then we're going to select animation. Our image turned as we came into animation. So we're going to press the T key. We're going to go to display. We're going to click front view. We can't see our image because we're in solid view, so we can click here and then select material. Now we can see our image again. Okay, so we want to set up our camera. So basically we're going to line up our image how we basically want to see it here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hold control. While holding control, we're going to hold Alt. And then we can press 0 on our number keypad. And what this will do is this will make our camera view. And when I say camera in Blender, you Blender, when you start up Blender from the default Blender settings, you automatically have a camera. When you hold control, press Alt, and then number pad 0, that'll automatically take you into camera view. Now I know some people don't have a number keypad to do that. So if we click here, this will take us into camera view, but I believe if we do this, this will take us into camera view where the camera is currently at. So I'm going to click here. There we go. So that, yeah, you want to go to view and then align view and then go to align active camera to view. And there you can see there's the shortcut, the keyboard shortcuts I was telling you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to left click. And when we did that, we have our camera now set up. This is our camera right here. Now what we want to do is press the N key to bring up our properties panel. In here, you want to look for view. All right. Once you find view, there's a thing that says lock camera to view. You want to put a check mark next to that. And what this does is this allows you to move your view here. And when you move this view, your camera will move along. So I'm going to press the N key to take away that properties panel. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan our view. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a view that I like. I'm going to hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom back. And what I'm doing is, see right here, this is like the gray of our background. There's our image there. There's the end of our image there. So I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button. This allows you to pan. I'm going to zoom in very slightly. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. So basically what's going on is you want to pick what you want to be inside of this view. So I like what's inside of this camera view currently. Okay, so with all of that done, with our empty selected, you can tell it's selected because it is highlighted orange. What we want to do is look down to these keys right here. These keys allow us to animate easier. What I'm going to do is left click here. And then what I'm going to do is select lock rot scale. And what that stands for is location, rotation, scale. I'm going to left click there. What I did there was I made it so that whenever we press the I key, we'll put in a keyframe for the location, the rotation, and the scale of an object. So basically what that means is that when we press I, Blender will remember the location, the rotation, and the scale of whatever object we currently have selected. So what we want to do is make sure we're on frame 1, which we are. We want to make sure we have our empty selected, which we do. We're then going to press I. Now, when we pressed I, what happened was we have a yellow line that popped up here. We also have these right here that popped up. And basically what these are keyframes showing us that on frame 1, this is our timeline right here. On frame 1 of our timeline, we have keyframes remembering the location, the rotation, and the scale of this object, which is our empty. So with the location, rotation, and scale remembered, now what we're going to do is we're going to pick how long we want our animation to be. Currently, we are set for 24 frames a second. So our animation basically will be 10 seconds as long as we go to 250. That's fine. So I'm holding the right mouse button. I'm dragging this timeline indicator. So I set this on 250. I could have also clicked here and typed in 250. So with us selected on empty, with the first keyframe, we pressed I, we put that on frame 1. Now we move this to frame 250, right? We still have our object selected. Now what we're going to do is we're going to click on this manipulator right here. We're going to click on this red arrow, and we're going to move this to the side just like this. And when I say this, I mean move the empty. So with this empty being moved and our timeline indicator being set for 250, frame 250, we're going to press I. And basically what you see here is now Blender is remembering the location, the rotation, and the scale of this object on frame 250. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click here. And when I clicked here, that just put the timeline indicator back to frame 1. So now when we click play, you can see that our cape is flowing. Now what's going on here is our cape is flowing along. However, this empty speeds up and then it slows down. What I want is I want this cape to just continually moving pretty much the same rate. So to do that, I'm going to click here to pause our timeline indicator. I'm going to click here to have our timeline indicator go back to frame 1. With our empty selected, I'm going to hover over this area right here. This is our dope sheet. You can see it says dope sheet right there. In Blender, by the way, it's important where your mouse is at, where when you press keyboard shortcuts. So you want your mouse right over here, and what you want to do is press the T key. By default, the way that Blender animates things is by interpolation. That's right here. By default, Blender's interpolation is set for Belzier. What this means is when you do a movement like we did, things will move from a standstill to going slightly faster and faster and faster. And then as the animation comes to an end, your object will start to slow down, slow down, slow down until it finally comes to a stop. We don't want this. We want our empty to move at a constant speed. The way we can do that is by selecting linear. So we're going to left click on linear. Okay, so with that done, we're going to click here to take our timeline indicator back to frame 1. Then I'm going to click play. And now if you look, you can see that our empty is moving now at a constant speed. Now, if you want your cape to flow less, you can decrease the strength of your displace modifier, or when I moved the empty, I moved it from here all the way over here. I could have selected the empty, and then suppose I selected it and then I moved it to like here. The effect as far as the how the cape is flowing would be less if this empty moved less distance. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to press the N key, and this brings up our properties panel. See where it says lock camera to view? We're going to unclick this. And we unclick this, I'm going to press the N key to take away that properties panel so that now we can zoom in and out without having our camera change its view. I had learned how to do this thing with capes, and flowing objects a couple of days ago, and I thought it was very cool then. I think this is very cool still now. Uh, I had done a tutorial a while ago on 2D art. I did a bunch of tutorials, and I will put a link up here so you can get to the main tutorial that I made showing how to do showing how to animate 2D art. Something else that I learned that is very easy since I did that tutorial, that is very cool that we can do to put more animation to this image that's very easy to do, is I'm going to click on this image here. Let's go back to frame 1. With our image clicked on, I'm going to click here to go to edit mode. I'm going to zoom in here. And what I'm going to do is make sure I'm on face select, which I am. And what I'm going to do with this on is I'm going to click here. And I am clicking specifically the faces over the eyes. So with that done, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to click here to go to object mode. I'm going to zoom back some. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to this data button again, and now I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to look to where we see shape keys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click plus. Now when I clicked plus, I made what's called a basis for shape keys. So the basis is what you see here. That's kind of like a way for Blender to come back to something. Now I'm going to click here. And when I clicked here, you can see this thing that says key 1. And what this means is now I can set up an animation with a shape key. So typically you form the basis, you hit plus, you make a key 1, and then you have your object, you click, and then you go to edit mode, which we're doing here. So what we're going to do is press S to scale on the Z axis, like this. Then I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm going to press A to deselect. Now I'm going to click here and then click here to go back to object mode. Okay, so now that we have that shape key, what we're going to do is I'm going to scroll down here. So here's our key 1, which we have selected. See right here where it says value? When I take this value up, we can see our character. This would work better without, if we had more vertices. However, because the eyes are so small, and depending on how fast we have this animate, basically what we can have is a very simple eye blink. So what we can do is, typically eye blinks are, I believe it's 2 frames to blink, 1 frame to stay blinked, and then 2 frames to have your eyes open again. So what we'll do is we'll go to frame 20. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hover over right here where it says value. We're going to press I, right? So then we're going to go with our number keypad, 1, 2. We'll go to 3. I think it's 3. Yeah, 3 to close eyes, 3 frames to have your eyes closed, and then 2 frames to have them open. Is one of the ways of having eyes blink. So we could have also clicked here, by the way, to go to frame 23 instead of pressing the arrow keys. Anyway, with that done, what we're going to do is we're going to take this value up, and then we're going to press I. So make sure you want to make sure your mouse is hovered over this to press I. When you have a mouse, your mouse indicator hovered over a value in Blender, a lot of times you can animate that value. So now what we're going to do is, actually I believe it's 2 frames. 2 frames is shut, 3 frames open. No, it doesn't have to be exact. That's just me. Anyway, we're going to click, we'll do 3 frames to open. So 1, 2, 3. We go to frame 26. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this back down, and then we're going to press I. So we have our eye blink here. So we have our cape flow and then we have our eyes blink. Let's go up to frame 180. Let's hover here. Over value, we'll press I. And we'll do, this time, 2 frames to shut. To shut our eyes, to have it, because we're basically making another blink. We're going to take this value up. We'll hover over value. We'll press I. I'm moving my mouse indicator over the timeline. Now we'll go 1, 2, 3. And then we'll take this value all the way down. Hover over our value menu here. Press I. So now we have, I'm going to hold the right mouse button. And we have another blink. So now what I'm going to do is zoom in. I'm going to press the T key to take away our tool menu there. I'm going to click this to go back to the beginning of our timeline indicator there. Okay, so let's hit play. And you can see our cape is flowing and our character blinks, which gives our character some life. Pretty cool. So I'm going to click here to pause this. Okay, so if you wanted to render out this animation, how would you do that? What you would do is you would click here, see where it says display, change this to new window. This is your standard high definition resolution here, which is fine. You would take this up to 100. If you needed more time but your video to still be clear, I would recommend you set for HD TV 720, but it's fine for how it is now. This is our frame rate, which is 24 frames a second. That is fine. Blender's default output is PNGs. These are individual images, which means if you go to render this now, this will put out individual images. This is extremely useful in other situations. However, in this current work that we're doing, we don't want this. We want to click here and select FFmpeg video. We then want to click on encoding. We want to look for presets. All right, so you're going right to presets. You're going to click here, and then you're going to select H264 NMP4. So that MP4 is basically an MPEG-4. So you're going to left click there. You're then going to scroll all the way down, and then where this says audio codec, we don't have sound, so we can leave this none. If you did have sound, I would recommend you select it MP3. Then what you want to do is look for output. Output is going to show where our video is going to go. So this is very important. So we're going to click here, and we're going to look for where do we want this video to go. So I'm going to select here, video output. I could also click here to make a new folder, but since I have this folder already made, I made this earlier, I'm going to click here. And then we could click accept, and Blender would put a name in for us, or we can put in a name ourselves. So I'll put To Animation. So this is what the name of our video will be. So then I'll click accept. Okay, there we go. Okay, with all of that stuff done, I recommend you go back. Before you hit the render button, check new window, resolution's good, 100% is good. Frame rate is good. We know where this is going. This is good. If you had sound, you know, we don't have sound, so that is fine. So now what we do is scroll all the way up, and we see render. If we click this would render an image. We don't want that. We want animation right here. So we'll left click on animation, and now Blender is starting to render out our video. Okay, and now with our video rendered out, I'm gonna right click here. This is the video, and this is the folder that we put it in. I'm going to go to VLC Media Player. If you don't know, VLC Media Player is an excellent free media player. I'm going to left click to open this up, and here's our video playing. Very cool. Okay, I think the animation looks cool. We can do a few things to it to make it look better. So it's fairly easy to do. So let me show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, New, Reload Startup File. We're going to click here. We're going to go to Video Editing. We're then going to click Add. We're going to go to Movie. And then we're going to look for that video that we just rendered out. So I'm just going to where I rendered it out. Here's the video here. So I'm going to left click here, and then I'm going to click Add Movie Strip. So here is our movie or video that we just rendered out. So what we're going to do is roll our mouse wheel to zoom in. When we rendered this movie out, we used the default frames in Blender, which were 250. Because it's the default frames in Blender, this is still 250, so you can see our movie perfectly fits. If you had a longer video, you would just increase your frames here rather than having it be the default 250. As it is though, what we can do to add some life to this is we can basically have our image zoom in. So what we'll do is we'll take our timeline indicator. I'm holding the right mouse button to drag it. So I'll go to about here. So I have this set for frame 240. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Add, Effect Strip, and then we're going to go to Transform. So I'm going to left click on Transform. When we did that, this green bar pops up. And what this does is this allows us to take our image and make it grow, move around. What we're going to do is we are going to look over here. If I press the N key, this goes away. If I press the N key, this comes back. It should be here by default, but if by some chance you didn't see this menu or don't see it now, you can press N. So see, it says effect strip right here. So these are the different values we can change. We want a uniform scale, which basically means that we'll scale the, if I hover here, I can make this menu a little bit bigger. Uniform scale means we'll scale the width as well as the height at the same time. So we'll click this. So when we click here, we got this check mark here. Now we have this scale, right? We want to hover over here and press I. And the reason why we are doing this is because we want this video file to be this size at this time, which is frame 240. When we pressed I, we can see this turned yellow, showing us that we have a keyframe telling Blender to remember this scale for frame 240. Okay, now before we move our timeline indicator, we want to make sure we put a keyframe for our position as well. So we're going to hover here, we're going to press I, we're going to hover here and then press I. Now what this is when we move these settings here for X, this will control our image, how it moves from left to right. Y will control how it moves up and down. So with us telling Blender, look, on frame 240, these are the settings we want. Now we're free to go back to frame 1. So we clicked here and our timeline indicator is back on frame 1. We can also see that from right here. Now what we want to do is take our scale and pull to the right to zoom in. We want to basically zoom in on a character's face. So now we're looking at the character's upper torso. So what we want to do is go down. So we're going to pull to the left to zoom in to our character's face. I think I'm going to make it go to the right some, like that. Okay, so now with our scale and our position, now we want Blender to remember this. So we'll hover here, we'll press I, and then I here as well. Okay, and now with that done, we'll click play. Be aware, see the frames per second here. So this isn't running at the actual speed that this will be when it gets output of Blender. So that looks cool. So we're going to add one more thing to here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here. We're going to take our timeline indicator back to frame 1. In Blender, the 3D viewport where your 3D cursor is at is where objects tend to come into Blender at. In the video editor, where our timeline indicator is where movie, image, and sound strips tend to come into Blender. So video, images, as well as sound strips tend to come in right to where this timeline indicator is at. So what we're going to do is we're going to click Add Sound. So I'm going to go to where I have an MP3 file, which is right here. I'm going to left click here, and then I'm going to click Add Sound. So here is that sound file right here, and it came right to where our timeline indicator is currently at. Okay, when you bring a sound file into Blender, a lot of times it helps to look right here where it says draw waveform, and I put a check mark here. This kind of gives us a visual way of seeing where sound's at. So basically where you see right here, there's not much sound right there. There's a decent amount of sound right there. Also, when you're working with sound inside of Blender, it's a good idea to go to playback, put a check mark next to audio scrubbing, and that allows us to, so I'm going to hold my right mouse button and pull this timeline indicator. And what this allows us to do is, as we pull the timeline indicator, we're able to hear the actual sound. I'm going to click here to go back to frame 1. I'm going to go back to playback, and I'm going to put a check mark next to AV sync. And what this does is this tries to have our sound stay matched up with our video. So I'm going to click play. Okay, now these horns aren't giving me what I want as far as this is only a 10-second video. So what I'm going to do is I can see here, here's the horn sounds right here. I'm going to click, left click, and drag this over to here. So I'm using these wave files. I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm using these wave files to kind of see what's going on. And I can see like there's music. It's the sound. When you click on this, by the way, like my hand is off the left mouse button. You have to left click to get this to stay where it's at. So here is a lot of sound right here. So this is the sound right here that I probably want. So what I can do is see, I'm going to left click here. That's interesting. But when I left click, you have to left click and then left click again to get this to stay. See how there's like this little sound here, but then it goes into this. This is probably what I want. So I'm going to click here, then I'm going to click play. I like that. Yeah, I like how that is there. So, yeah, so this just gives us some sound to our video. Suppose you wanted this sound to fade out at the end. So let me click back here, click play again. So suppose, right here, it'll keep up because our video ends. What you can do is I'll go to right before the video ends, because it's only 10 seconds. I'll go to 8 seconds. And then I'll make sure I'm clicked on our sound file here. See where it says volume here? I'll hover here, and then I'll press I, and then I'll right click and drag our timeline indicator. I'll go to right to 250 by clicking here. Now I'll click on volume, and then I'll change this to 0 and then press enter, and then I'll press I to keyframe the volume. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to click play. And then basically you have the music, fade out as we get towards the end of the video. Okay, so with all that stuff done, how do we get this out to get this out of Blender? So I'm going to click here. I'm then going to click here. I'm going to go back to the default setting for Blender. We're going to look to very similar to what we did before, display. We're going to click here. We're going to change this to new window. Our resolution, this is fine how it is. We want to make sure this is at 100%. We're going to make sure we change this to FFmpeg video. We're going to scroll down, look where it says encoding, see where it says presets. We're going to click here. We're going to set this to H.264 in MP4. And now this time we actually have audio, so we're going to look down to where it says audio codecs, where it says none. We're going to click here, and then we're going to select MP3. Okay, now that we have that set up, we have to make sure we know where this is going to go to. So see where it says output. I'm going to click here. I'm going to click data. I'm then going to click temp. I'm going to click here. I'm going to go back to my video output file. Then I'm going to see where this says 2D animation. I want to make sure that the name is separate from this. So I'm going to name this second 2D animation. And then with that done, I'm going to click accept. Then I'm going to double check to make sure that everything is set up. So we have this set for new display. Our resolution is fine. Our frame rate is 24 frames per second. This is right. All of this is right. And we have things set up as far as our audio codecs is concerned. So we should be ready to render this out. Okay, so what we're going to do is scroll back to the top here. We're going to look to this animation button, and we're going to left click on animation, and now we can see our video starting to render out there. Okay, and now our video finished rendering out. You can see that video right here. So I'm going to right click and then open this with the VLC media player. Very cool. I'm just going to lower the volume down on this. Hopefully from this you can see you can take 2D images and you can get fairly easy animation fairly quickly. So hopefully you guys will come up with some very cool things from this. And yeah, like I said, I learned how to do this the other day. I wanted to show you guys, so it was fun. Okay guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and reshare them, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And to those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe, and thank you for viewing.